Our culture's in a really messy time where men and women are pointing fingers at each other, and diverse groups across the spectrum are trying to figure out new ways of having conversation that's meaningful and can actually help us achieve real change in the world we live in. It's complicated, perhaps more complicated than ever. And in the midst of all of that, our voices genuinely really trying to make a difference. And one of those people is Richie Hardcore, who'll be joining us on the show today. We're going to talk a little bit about his journey, his work as an advocate, an educator, and the real life social issues he's trying to tackle from an informed perspective. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. I loved meeting Richie and where our conversation went, his gentleness, his humility, his kindness, and his genuine desire to learn more and share what he's learning with the world around him. Now, on The Transformationist, we welcome people exactly as they are. So I will give you a heads up. There's a little bit of language here. Please don't get offended. Instead, listen and hear the heart behind the words. Welcome to this episode of The Transformationist. Are you thirsty for inspiration and curious about the life-changing process of transformation? Welcome to The Transformationist. Whether you already know the transformation you're looking for or you're looking for guidance on the way there, these stories of hope will give you practical tips, plenty of encouragement, and an invitation into real, life-giving transformation, whether you're transforming culture or becoming more yourself. Your story is welcome here. On this week's episode of The Transformationist, I'm delighted to have another Kiwi on the show. I do love bringing our Antipodean voices to the rest of the world. His name is Richie Hardcore, and whilst he made a name for himself initially as a Muay Thai fighter, he's now a really proactive, gentle and yet also aggressive voice for changing some of the aspects or views that we have on masculinity and domestic violence and just about every kind of destructive social behaviour you could name. So welcome to the show, Richie Hardcore. It's so great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for being interested in talking to me, Tash. It's really nice to be here.
Well, it's not hard. I think it would be fair enough to say that you have a pretty dynamic and pervasive social media presence. So it's hard not to be interested in talking to somebody who is talking so frequently about these issues. So maybe if you could introduce yourself in your own words and describe what you do, because it is kind of vast and like you do lots of different things. So, give us a shot at explaining it all.
Yeah. I confuse myself with it all. So I'm an educator and keynote speaker. So I travel a lot in Australia and New Zealand, and I talk about a range of topics, but they're all interrelated. So I'll talk about constructs of masculinity and how the traditional ones are shown to be harmful, and what are some alternatives to that. I talk about sexual violence prevention and family violence prevention, and that's on the same spectrum, like those things are interconnected. I talk about mental health, and I do a little sometimes like motivational speaking, like this is where I come from, and this is how I turned out good despite my adversity, like that sort of story. And I chat a little bit about just health and wellness from time to time as well, because when I'm not speaking, I'm a personal trainer and Muay Thai coach. I've done martial arts for 26 years now, and I used to be I was relatively successful as a fighter in a small country. I won a bunch of titles here in New Zealand and South Pacific title, and got to fight in like Japan and Australia and in Thailand and stuff, and picked up a lot of lessons along that journey. And now I like to give back. It's not just about the competitive fighting. It's more about helping people on their own sort of journey of, wellness and self-esteem. And martial arts has got a really, they say like the beauty of martial arts can't be seen and experienced. And I think that's quite true. Like quite a lot of people look at what we do and just see the blood and the guts and the violence and the macho posturing, which is not the good takeaways. That's the sort of stuff that kind of, it's the sort of stuff I sort of kind of try and Trojan horse all those ideas around, hey, that mainstream concept of masculinity is real problematic. It's not about Conor McGregor flexing on TV. It's actually about blah 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 blah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, and I'm really interested in because obviously, and I'm sure this is such. I try to avoid asking stock standard questions when I chat to people on the show, but I guess one of the standard questions that you probably get asked a lot is, well, you're all about kind of changing this face of masculinity, and your background has been in this really violent sport.
Mm.
Is that something that you get asked a lot, or that you have
Yeah.
been asked in the past?
Yeah, that's something that I have been asked a lot, and it's something I'm always trying to figure out how to explain easily. I guess
Mm,
I guess for me, I have come up with using the term a false equivalency. So when I think about family violence or sexual violence in a comparative to a combat sport, that's a false equivalency. Because in a combat sport there is consent, there is mutual respect, generally speaking.
mm,
There's an adjudicator. There's a set of rules that you have to abide by. If someone within that competition says, "I don't want to do this anymore," the fight ends. So there's a whole lot of mutually agreed upon understandings before that undertaking um, takes place. And while the outcome might look rough, people getting knocked out with their faces busted open,
true.
which I've done to people and had people do to me.
Mm,
Like in my 26 years of being involved in martial arts, the the respect between competitors and indeed around the worldwide community it's pretty special. You know what I mean? Like it's a rare thing where people can set aside race and creed and lived history and lived experience and just, hey, let's see who's better at doing this today,
mm,
and try and extend themselves as human beings through a test, just like running a marathon perhaps, or doing Olympic lifting or whatever it may be. And
yeah.
that's very different from family violence or sexual violence, when we know it's about unequal power dynamics. There's no consent, obviously.
Mhm, mhm.
It's one person trying to exert power over another emotionally as much as physically. It's about ongoing control. It's about social isolation.
Yeah.
There's no agreement from the victim to be involved in that. They just have to
Mhm,
endure that. So, as good as I can explain it, a sport is very different to. I mean, a lot of sports have contact and injuries in them too, and I don't think physical harm through athletic pursuits is necessarily something that we have to avoid as a society. Are we going to like not climb mountains or go running for long distances or play football or
mhm.
rugby or hockey? It's just that, I guess, with fighting, I guess like people think it's about. I don't know. Like I can see why people think it is like this negative social
Mhm.
and this negative thing for society, but for me, I'm just like, man, like I have this tattoo on my leg and it's the logo of my fight team. Like fighting saved my life, Like
Yeah.
I was this really like insecure kid who come from like a dysfunctional family, and then I stepped into my very first martial arts school and just like found my peace, like through discipline and hard work and the pursuit of trying to not through trying to beat other people. I bettered myself as a human being. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I love that. I think one of the things that you said that really stood out to me, I think, was often that comparison of violence to violence, or that an act of physical aggression must be the same no matter what its context. And then when you talked about the rules of engagements, so to speak, that actually we maybe have a tendency to look at the lowest common denominator and to
Yeah.
look at that first view. But really, what's going on is that Muay Thai and so many of the other martial arts are actually about creating a set of constructs and rules and ways of expressing respect and consent, to people who are participating in the group. And I really like that. I've done a little bit of kickboxing in my
Oh,
time,
cool.
and certainly yeah, I mean, like just not anywhere near the same deal, but found it to be a remarkably empowering experience, because partly it started with the self-respect piece, but also then the kind of the way that you can engage with others through that process. It was really quite amazing. Not even in participating, but even observing, others. So that was really interesting to me. Can you talk to me a little bit more about, you sort of spoke a little bit about the insecurity, and Muay Thai kind of helping with that. What was it about that construct that gave you a place of, kind of expression of identity, that gave you a place to sort of move beyond maybe some of that insecurity?
Yeah, man, like I was a super insecure young person from like childhood right through to like, to be honest, probably till I was nearly 20 or something, Like, I mean, and when I look back through my 20s and 30s, it's just been this constant evolution. I just didn't. There's a difference between like winning your bid when you're 10 years old and and getting validation from women who are attractive, because actually you're still insecure. Do you know what I mean? But there's still,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, but there's this kind of on the same spectrum, I guess. You know what I mean? You just cover your shit up with different things. Well, I guess as my body changed, as I got like physically stronger and could, run further and faster and lift more weights and got better at the skill side of martial arts, I felt my ability to use my voice grow at the same time. I literally used to be one of those kids who would walk around and to like shuffle my shoes and look at the ground. And while I had friends, like I'd always often preface anything I was going to say with an apology, like, "Oh, sorry, but," or like, "Oh, my joke's not that funny," or I don't know. Like I just had this really low self opinion. And I guess as I developed as a martial artist, there was this simultaneous growth internally, I think, and I think that's what I'm trying to explain, and not doing a very good job of it. That it's all the
You're good. You're good.
and that's all the internal changes is what the public doesn't see, and that's what's most beneficial.
Yeah.
Because I stopped looking at the ground and I started walking straight. Like I started respecting myself, and I think for a long time I didn't, for whatever reason. And that's been a constant back and forth too. Like I'm nearly 40 now, and it's just still like, there's ebbs and flows in my life where I'm like, oh, you're a piece of shit. And then, oh yeah, you're actually contributing, you're doing all right at life, contributing to society. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And martial arts has given me this sort of framework of consistent effort to pour some of that energy into and get a growth out of.
Yeah, which I love. I think that's there's something that I want to talk to you about, and I was thinking maybe I'll talk to you about it a little bit later on. But really, what you're touching on, it's right there. It's your posture. Is probably one of the things that I've appreciated so much, in terms of engaging with your messages on social media, and and the copious interviews that you do and all that kind of stuff. As you are so steadily working towards trying to instigate, initiate, foster, support, and nurture positive change in the world around you, at both like a personal level and then out in the world, you just seem to have this posture of continual leaning into learning, to adapting, to looking at different ways of making it better. Is that something that's intentional on your part?
It is intentional now. Before, I just kind of was like, oh, that makes sense to me. I'm going to read as much about that as I can and see how that fits into my existing understandings of the world. I'm quite good at, I don't know if I'm good at it, but like I'll experience cognitive dissonance and be like, oh yeah, how you were is shit. Change that. Don't do that anymore. so do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah. So I've been on this journey, I guess, for like 20 years now of, oh, that doesn't feel good, and that doesn't make sense with my broader how I want the world to be, and your actions aren't aligning with that, and your understanding of the world aren't aligning of how you want the world to be, and so you've got to change. I'm sorry, did that alarm alert thing come through?
No, it's
Oh,
good.
okay,
You're
okay.
good.
And I guess something I've talked about in the past is that first really struck with me with first diet. So I became a vegetarian, and I eat a largely vegan but not full vegan diet now, because I was like, well, I'm trying to like create less harm on the planet, and every day I'm eating murdered animals. And that doesn't really make sense, like there's a simple thing you can do, which is, every day I'll read something about how the seas are depleted, and I'll see some environmentalist going on Twitter or whatever about how, the oceans are dying and yada, yada, yada. And then they're straight off to eat like a fillet of fish. And I'm like, that doesn't really work though. Like you need to actually change. None of us are perfect. Like none of us are perfect. I'm so full of contradictions and hypocrisies too. But for me, like one of the simple things I could do is change my diet. That was that was the first really big thing that I took on. And I've been a very strict vegetarian for 20 years now, and I eat an increasingly vegan diet. I struggle to eat a full vegan diet just because I travel a lot and I'm busy, and being like optimally healthy is really important to me. Not saying that you can't be vegan and optimally healthy, but for me, I find it hard. But I still think that doing something is better than doing nothing. And then the next big part of that journey, which is, I guess, what underpins all my work now, is my early discoveries of like feminist literature. I was listening to like punk rock and hardcore, and that music is really politicized, particularly in the late 90s and early 2000s. Like all those bands out of American shit were singing about like veganism and straight edge and environmentalism and feminism too. And there was this band that I talked about once, I think in the very first public talk I ever gave in 2014 for Creative Mornings. And they're called Downset, and they're from Los Angeles. And I never met them, but they did this really moving song called Ritual. And it's like 1 out of 3. And they say, my sisters are free, incarcerated by misogyny, something or other like that. And I was like, 1 out of 3, what is that? And then you do a quick like look around, and it's like, oh, 1 in 3 women are victims of sexual violence in their lifetime. What the fuck? Like, how is that a thing? And while that statistic is more oftenly quoted as 1 in 5 these days, we still have like an endemic rate of sexual violence across the world. And I discovered that through the music I was listening to. So I started reading around, and then I had to start reflecting on like my own pornography use as a young man. Like, I went to an all boys school, and people would chuck around magazines, and the internet came about, and it really struck me that what we were looking at for our sexual gratification was quite at odds at my desire to end a world where women are routinely harassed and abused and sexually assaulted. And I'm not saying that looking at porn makes you instantly a rapist. That's not true.
That might be a leap too far.
That's a leap too far. But I have, through 20 years of reading and understanding these things academically, that if we come to understand that actions come out of a culture which broadly accepts them and teaches them tacitly and explicitly, we need to understand that when we minimize and degrade women as beings and turn them into just things to fuck, which is quite often what mainstream heterosexual pornography does. Well, I can't be trying to be part of the solution and consuming that. So I had to go through this journey of like, I'm going to stop looking at porn now too. And and I guess that's the sort of how I've figured things out as I've gone along, and
it's kind of like yours as a practice of, it's almost like your learning practice actually is just a practice of first paying attention and then curiosity and exploration to understand, okay, what's the impact of this? And therefore, do I need to realign what's happening internally with what's happening externally?
Yeah, exactly. And I just happen to do that publicly, and that means that sometimes I can say the wrong thing, or sometimes people can call me out on Twitter for some shit I didn't even know about,
Right? Yeah.
And that can be very painful. And And I definitely think there's a definite place that we need to talk about as an activist community or as a progressive community on, hey, how do we help people come to new understandings in a way that's not about shaming them and humiliating them and ostracizing them, because we all don't know what we don't know till we know it. And there's a way to be. There's this whole thing about like calling people in rather than calling them out. Oh, hey man, I saw you said this thing, and I just thought maybe for open conversation we could talk about it, or maybe you didn't realize, or my lived experience. It's like, instead of like, here's a thing you said 6 years ago, and I screenshotted it at the time to use as ammunition against you in the future, and that's going to be proof that you're a horrible person. Do you know what I mean? Like
I think that one of the dangerous things about that social media world that we live in, at a time when, you know, perhaps more of us than ever before are trying to use those platforms to talk about the change we want to see. I just feel a lot of the time, I feel like it's actually pushing us further away.
Oh my God!
From the real conversation. You know?
Thank you. Yes, because I'm quite shy about writing. Like, I have a blog that I write on literally about like twice a year, and it looks dumb, but like I've actually really wanted to write a thing about that, because I pay a lot of attention to these constructs, these conversations about constructs of masculinity. You know, like I just did a TEDx talk on it back in October, and then all of a sudden, boom, American Psychological Association comes out with, hey, mainstream masculinity as it's constructed and conveyed is problematic psychologically for men, and here are some ways you can deal with it. Massive pushback. And then Gillette comes out with their hugely controversial ad, huge pushback. And what I'm trying to understand is like, yo, what I think is happening is that when people feel attacked, they retreat further into their reactionary viewpoints, or they retreat further into what's always made them feel safe. And you know, all those conversations around privilege, you know, like when you don't understand, because privilege is unconscious, and quite often we're unaware that we have it until someone distinctly sits down and talks to us about what that even is, you know. So if you're just a regular guy, like, who happens to be of European descent, you've probably never had a conversation about the fact that your heterosexuality and your skin color and your sex give you like unearned advantages in society. Because when the fuck do you ever talk about that when you're out with your bros? You know, like, that's not a regular conversation. That's a very nuanced, distinct conversation. And then you have all these people on the internet in the social justice movement expecting Joe Blogs to get that. And so they're like, yo, you're a bad person, fucking misogynist piece of shit, like, and then it becomes like, oh, well, those feminazis are crazy, because there's no middle ground there. You know, like
everybody just retreats to the corners.
Everyone just retreats to corners, and it's just ugly, and increasingly, I think that's what's happening. So everyone's feeling really got at on either side of the conversation, and nothing positive really happens. So with the Gillette ad, sorry, you want to go? Because I'm like going off. I'm going off.
Well, I was the thing that I want to say, and let's come back and talk to that Gillette ad, because I do want to talk about, like, at some point I want to get to, you know, is there an opposite to toxic masculinity?
Yeah.
But the thing that I wanted to get to is, you know, I think you're probably a good example where, because you are in the front lines and you are allowing your kind of human evolution to be relatively public, you know, you're someone who has actually pretty personally experienced the backlash quite a bit. And I guess, you know, I observe that, you know, in a third party kind of way, you know, several steps removed. And I just wonder, like, is what we're experiencing now, I guess I'm wondering, is it just that we're experiencing our culture learning how to grapple with these questions in a way that they haven't before? And so everybody's kind of at, again, it's that like base level, entry level. I know that I need to step into this conversation, but I'm going to step in with a statement instead of with a question, even though we know that the question would be better, but I just don't know how else to go. And that's the piece that I'm so longing to see us get to, is the point where, you know, instead of you being called out on, you know, Twitter or whatever for whatever it is that you might have said, that somebody is able to engage with you and say, can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes.
Like,
I love
help
it.
me. Help me understand that.
I love you say that. So I have a modest following on my public Facebook page and Instagram and Twitter and stuff. And I was having this conversation on my Facebook page yesterday because these guys were saying this really fucked up, like super racist, like racist. They had this racist ideology that like IQ and intelligence in general was racially defined. Like they were trying to argue with all the pseudoscience that they were drawing on like Stephen Molyneux and Jordan Peterson and stuff, and I was like, "Yo, this is hectic." But I didn't want to just straight up ban them, and I was trying to be like, "How do you have a conversation with people publicly that doesn't spread hateful ideas and ideology, but at the same time challenges that?" And then there's this older woman who's really engaged on my Facebook page, and she turns out to be a teacher, and she DM'd me, and and I really appreciate it because she's like super onto it, like I think that's the thing, like when you put yourself out there as a dude who's like, I'm open to talk about anything and learn publicly, a lot of people get into it. It's like real cool. Like I'm really stoked on like my online community, like while my social media use can be a bit too much for me and for my personal life, and I'm learning to put parameters on not being on my phone all the time. Some of the conversations are awesome, and this woman, her name's Sandy. She won't mind me mentioning it. I've met her. She came to my TEDx talk, and she's like, "I really want to meet you," And I was like, "Yo, you're awesome. Thanks." And she's a teacher, and she said exactly what you said. She said instead of telling people off or like shooting them down or shutting them down, ask them to explain themselves. Like, why do you think that, or in your experience, why is that, or blah 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 blah, and then it opens up a conversation, because I think what we're doing more and more on the internet, at least. And that does transfer into in-person interactions. Is we're talking at each other and talking past each other, and we're trying to talk to win. We want to prove how right we are and how much more virtuous we are, or how much more stupid the other person is, or whatever. Instead, it's like, well, why don't we talk to kind of understand one another's viewpoints, and maybe somewhere in the middle with some of that stuff, there's actually like a good balance. Some things are outright misogynistic and racist and classist, and they don't deserve any consideration. But other people who perhaps are more moderate and just have never had these conversations before would be really awesome allies and would do the work too, if we just helped them understand where we're coming from as people who want to sort of make the world better. Do you know what I mean? And I've had to do that myself too, because I used to kind of talk on behalf of, I guess, people,
Right, yeah. So you pick up the microphone regardless of whether or not you were invited to be the spokesperson.
Yeah. And I thought, and it was coming from a good place, but then
of course.
because I was always like, yo, dude should stand up for like women or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Or but sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe that's not my space. You know what I mean? Maybe it's good to just, hey, I actually asked the Green MP, Golriz Grauman, sorry if I pronounced her name wrong, this question at an event recently. How do we better use our privilege to help people who have been historically marginalized and oppressed? I know it's sounding a bit jargony, and I'm sorry if you were listening to this and you're like, yo, but I don't have a better way of saying it. And she was like, well, you could always just ask that the person or the group that you're allying with, like, oh, hey, like, I saw this. Would you be comfortable if I responded, or yada, yada, yada? You know what I mean? So I think that's a space. And then like, I think there is also like, there is a time and place to just stand up and be like, hey, yo, that's not what's up. Like that's wrong. Like how you're speaking right now is, it's entrenching the status quo, and that status quo, whatever we're talking about. When a guy makes a rapey joke, and you're like, yo, man, like, probably didn't mean it, but when you joke about rape, you're kind of tacitly supporting the status quo that we have, where 1 to 3 to 1 to 5 women are a victim of sexual violence, and they'll be like, no, bro, I'm just joking. I'm like, yeah, but rape's not a funny thing, bro. And then you have that sort of conversation. I think guys need to learn to do that. You know what I mean? similarly with like race, I got really moved last night by the latest Viggo Mortensen film called The Green Book. Have you seen that?
Yeah. No, it's on my list. It's on my list though.
Oh my God! Like I was laughing. It was very human. It's a very touching film, and they did a great job. They did a great job talking about that historic friendship. And when you look at the racism that modern America still lives with, but before the South was desegregated and stuff, it's so heartbreaking. And then we have to understand that was only like 40 fucking years ago, like it wasn't a long 40, 50 years ago, like it wasn't a long time ago. And like we still have African American people getting killed by police and incarcerated at far higher rates than people who aren't of color, and that shit transfers like around the world. Like who makes up all the worst social statistics is colonized peoples. And I don't think that's like massively ideological to say. It's just like fuck when you go into a country and like take all their land and resources and prevent people from speaking their language and murder like a huge percentage of them through force or disease. Like, of course, it's going to take fucking generations to get over. But a lot of people don't stop and thinking about having those conversations, particularly in a neoliberal society where we blame the individual for the situation. You didn't work hard enough, or you were lazy at school. That's why you got a shit job, or no job. Instead of looking at like the broader context and environment in which an individual finds itself. I really struggle to think, how can you think that the neighborhood someone lives in, the access to food, the type of school they go to, their parents' work experience, the friends of their parents, like how does that not affect like the outcomes of a person's fucking life? You can't just say, well, everyone's got equal opportunity. Well, that's not true. That's not true. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you have those conversations with people in a way that doesn't get their back up? I think that's where the battle lies, to come back to your point, like, because I sometimes to be honest, sometimes I want to go back to where I come from and be like, yo, fuck you, motherfucker, you're a fucking idiot, like, but I have to I'm like, yo, fuck, come to the gym, we'll fight about this, like I have to to be honest with you, sometimes I do get really frustrated and go back to like those adolescent defaults in my head and then be like, actually, dude, you just have to be patient and bite your fingers, and you don't actually have to reply right now. And how is this going to be? How do you make this conversation constructive? And I think the good thing for me is having been on the negative end of being called out. Like while it's painful and it's fucks with your mental health, and you worry about, oh, it's just going to affect my career and my speaking engagement's going to dry up or whatever. It's also like, okay, cool. Well, that's how it feels to be on the end of that. Don't do that yourself, and find a constructive way to have this conversation. And increasingly, that's what I'm trying to do.
How much do you think, I mean, obviously the various initiatives that you're involved with, but particularly, some of the things I think about, One Step is All It Takes, the running club, which is really focused on like getting people moving as a way of proactively addressing mental wellness. How much do you think some of those initiatives are actually, just proactive expressions of how you're learning to sort of maintain this trajectory and discipline around continuing to have these conversations that are really hard and kind of demoralize you?
Sorry, can you rephrase that or ask me that again? Like how
I'm just wondering, like, how much of it, like, would you have found yourself doing as broader work as you do around issues of like health and wellness and mental health? If it weren't for needing to take care of yourself,
sure,
as you go about this work.
Yeah. Oh, like for me, like it's that old adage, man. Like the personal is political. Like everything I do stems from my lived experience. So all my advocacy work around mental health comes from the fact that like I've been really suicidally depressed before. I've had really bad anxiety before from what they call reactive depression. And I'm fortunate enough that I had really good habits in place and embedded in my lifestyle before I experienced that I had a fallback to go to. which was exercise, a history of psychotherapy and visiting psychologists, and a supportive community, and also my sobriety. Those are all things that helped me get through like a very prolonged period of depression and anxiety. And so I want to share that with people with help others. So one step actually was the idea of my good friend Lydia O'Donnell, who's like a champion marathon runner. She just came like 20th at the New York Marathon last year, which is fucking that's insane. And you know, she's got some there's mental health issues within her family, and she got in touch and she was like, yo, you talk about mental health all the time. Let's set up this run crew. And so we have this running crew every Monday here in Auckland. And to be honest, the numbers are quite low at the moment. But like what's happened is that little one step is all it takes. Have popped up all around New Zealand and now Australia too. Like people have got in touch and like, oh hey, can we do that where we live? And we're like, fuck yeah, you can. And like, yeah, like high five person on the internet. Like it's really exciting to see that, because a lot of not everyone, some people do need ongoing pharmacological drugs to help with their mental health. There's not saying that it's not a place for drugs, but it helps. But it helps. You know, there's so much more science about like if you exercise, if you sleep more, if you don't use illicit drugs and alcohol, if you eat better, if you talk, like those things are really, really good for our mental health. But we're increasingly moving away from them in a modern world where we're all like stuck in our cell phones and we don't move often because our job is sedentary and we hardly see our friends. You know, so it's
all the stuff.
So that's a very like this is what's worked for me personally, and then it's, you know, quote unquote evidence-based as well. So let's try and promote it using whatever humble channels that we have. Same with all my work around, you know, family violence. Like I grew up in a household that had family violence in it, and it was fucking awful, and it's impacted me personally my whole life to some degree. And how do I help make society better in some way, so perhaps other children don't grow up like that?
So let's talk about that for a second, because I know that you came from a background of domestic violence. You've talked about your dad sort of moving in and out of sobriety and some of the impacts of that. What's really fascinating, I think, about your story is that your background is not a typical story of this is what I grew up in, this is who I became, therefore, and then I had to fight my way out of that. But actually, you talk and you have talked in the past about making conscious choices to just not go down that path at all. And so from a pretty early on age, just as you sort of mentioned, you were kind of straight edge and choosing that path. You know, what was the motivation? Like, how did you become the person that you are now? And with this kind of view of constantly wanting the world to be at a better place and to change it. How did that happen for you?
Oh, yo. Well, yeah. So, yeah, I grew up. So my household was very unstable all the time. And there was a lot of like emotional violence, or, you know, emotional abuse, and a lot of name calling and yelling and screaming and stuff getting smashed and shit like that all the time. The physical violence was a feature, but it wasn't like a super regular feature. And I've talked to both my parents about that, because I think it's important to acknowledge that my dad's changed and made his apologies, and he's done the work. And like, I really love my dad, and my dad's awesome, because I guess I'm like a degree of a public person, and I'm like, hey, do you mind if I talk about what my fucking early life was like? And he's always been like, as long as you don't embellish it and it helps other people, then I'm more than happy for you to do that. I think that's really big, you know. So
yeah, that's awesome. Like, and kudos, because it's a special kind of person that is able to, you know, share not just their triumphs, but also, you know, to also allow the lesson to be in the failing. That's awesome.
And just like that, it's time for the ad read. Now, we're talking about some pretty serious stuff in this episode, and undoubtedly you've probably already heard something you either firmly agree with or you couldn't disagree more. Tell me all about it. come over and join the Facebook page, Tash McGill, Writer and Strategist, or the Transformationist Podcast with Tash McGill Facebook group. Either place, you are welcome with your ideas, opinions, and what you've got to contribute to this conversation about how we make our way towards having better conversations in the world. I want to hear from you. I welcome your opinion. Please hit us up over there or at the website, thetransformationist.org.
So those early experiences really kind of made me just kind of, that's kind of why I was so insecure and whatnot. But from a young age, I kind of was like, yo, everything's kind of fucked. Like, how do we make things different, And so I gravitated towards, as I was saying earlier, like the punk and hardcore scene, hip hop too, music that was angry music, but eventually I found music that was angry about something. So I moved from those ideas of those bands really kind of were like, oh, yo, this is something I can fully, like, it really resonated with me on a deep level, the injustices of the world. And then I just guess I've been on this journey to try and deepen my understanding of them on an academic viewpoint and adjust my life accordingly. And that's the same with like sobriety. My house was like a mess when I was a teenager. So when my friends I had some older friends in the city who were like older and cooler and they had good style and they were straight edged, they had taken this pledge to like never drink drugs and smoke, and they made these really conscious choices, and they kind of made it cool, I guess, without being like the Christian youth group. They had like sick bands and like everything was fun. And I flew to New York when I was 19 years old and would just hang out in New York for 3 months and go to like fucking gnarly underground clubs and jumbo stages and like did most of that sober, Like, I didn't call myself straight edge till I was 26. Like I did experiment a little bit with alcohol and drugs, but it never became a lifestyle for me. And that's in part because I had this deep reservation because of understanding the genetic history of alcoholism and then my lived experience. And then also the older I got, the more I saw that alcohol and other substance use around me was like hamstringing people. Like, I had friends who would be fucked up every weekend, And when you grow up in an unstable environment, quite often what becomes common for you or feels familiar for you or even like is your comfortable place is being in instability, So I've always gravitated towards people who party a lot or do a lot of drugs or extreme in other ways, like they're ultra athletes or they're, gnarly MMA fighters or they're extreme achieving people or politicians or business people. Like I'm not particularly good with the middle ground, like I quite always feel comfortable with like kind of out on the fringes, you know what I mean? And so that means like I've always been around a lot of people who've had some degree of like substance use or mental health shit and going on. And I don't know, like I've had to be like, well, this doesn't work, like, so I need to change myself. And when I was younger, I got quite self-righteous and angry with my personal choices. And it was one of those, this is like before Twitter was a thing, but like, I was like, like people come to my house. I'm like, yo, you can't smoke on my house. Like you have to go out on the street and smoke, like I was quite like judgy or like, this is how you recycle properly, you ignorant motherfucker, like, or, do you know what I mean? Like, and as I've gotten older and mellowed and made some really big mistakes in my personal life and hurt people I've really cared about, I've had to humble myself and realize I didn't actually have it all figured out when I was like 29 and graduating from university, just because I had
What isn't that the standard? I mean, I thought we all had it figured out by then.
I know, and that's the thing. That's it. We've been talking about this whole like call out culture and stuff. A lot of the people, and this isn't ageist, but like a lot of the people that I see perpetrating that nasty, toxic environment online, they're quite young. I'm like, I don't know like what your lived experience is by the time you're 27, but telling you what, man, like wait till you get in your 30s and you fuck up some shit like I have. It'll humble you and you'll be forced to reflect on yourself. You know what I mean? Like, because I was a bit of a self-righteous dick when I was in my 20s, and I've had to look at that and be like, oh, that's actually what sucked, and it actually made people I care about step back from me instead
Mm-hmm.
of bringing them in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that when I was first designing this podcast in particular, and I was kind of brainstorming like who's going to be interested in this, who's going to be interested in these types of conversations, and one of the things that I wrote down was that people who this show is really for people who have got to their early or mid-30s and they've realized that the way that they've been thinking up till now is not going to be the type of thinking that kind of moves them into the next stage. Because I do think there's this partly it's just, your human evolution of growing up, but there's something that failure, that deep personal failure that happens internally, right? It's not when you get fired from a job. It's not when it's not that stuff that's external. It's the internal failure when you realize that you've let yourself down, or the idea of who you wanted to be, and you didn't know any better at the time. But that's such a critical and pinnacle moment of like growing up, I think. Like, I feel like that's the point when you really grow up, is when you realize for the first time that actually you're entirely responsible for the situation that you found yourself in by the choices you've made and the thoughts and the whatever. And you can also then make choices to be different. And what's fascinating to me about you, Richie, is that it's almost like you had that way earlier than anybody else.
Well, that's fucking profound, Tash. And just like, I've never talked to you before now, but now I'm like, we should totally be friends. Like, because that's a really good thing you said. Like, this person's smart. Like, yeah, that's it.
Thanks.
No. But seriously, like, I kind of was on this trajectory of like, I'm rejecting all these things that I think are societally problematic, and I'm impacting them on my personal life. But then my marriage ended because I had an affair. But it's not entirely and while it wasn't a healthy relationship on a whole bunch of levels,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't cognizant of any of that stuff, and it just ended in this big mess. And I carried, and I still carry, like fucking years and years later, like so much shame about that poor choice of actions. And because despite, like the fact that I didn't have the emotional literacy, and I didn't have the communicative tools, and I have, like a personal history of dysfunction and all this sort of stuff. Like, I could use those as excuses and be like, I'm not a bad person, blah, blah, blah. I just did it because of this. But the fact of the matter is like, I hurt someone I really, really love by doing that, and I hurt myself in the process, and all the people around us. And it's a whole different podcast, but like, that is the internal failing that I did really, really young, and for ever since then have been on this journey of like, you don't have it all figured out. You have to stay humble, and you have to help other people if they want to go on that journey as well. And that's what I've come to do. I just kind of put my shit out there. And there's this comedian like DeRay Davis. Do you know DeRay Davis?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't imagine everyone would like him. He's not particularly like gentle. Like, he's like a far rawer Dave Chappelle, But But DeRay Davis does this thing where he's like, I put my shit out in the street, motherfucker. People will be like, oh, you did this? He's like, I know, motherfucker. I told you, And I'm like, that's me. I just put all my shit out there. And if you want to weaponize it against me, well, that's on you. But if you want to talk about it and what I learned from it and how that impacts what I do now and who I am and how it's actually made me, through all the pain and the tears and the poor mental health, a better person, these are my learnings and my takeaways. And that genuinely underpins a lot of what I do,
Which I think is a gift, right? And that's the gift that growing up brings, and it's the gift that self-reflection, self-awareness, and that ability to acknowledge, however humbling it might be, but to acknowledge those moments that become pivotal in our own transformation. I just kind of I often like to think that if I'm not a parent, but if I had the opportunity to parent, the things that I would focus on would just not be the traditional education stuff.
Oh.
I want to raise kids in the world who are critical thinkers, who have high emotional intelligence, who are highly self-aware, but most importantly are able to set themselves on a trajectory of constantly aligning the internal value structure and what they are learning about how they are and be and can respond and give to the world, constantly aligning that internal story with their external practice. And I think, there's so much that sort of an industrialized education system contributes. There's so much that our very classist colonial society contributes to that, but making a change and doing what you can is such a gift to bring the world. I wanted to ask if it's okay, is there an alternative narrative to the toxic masculinity story that we're talking about at the moment? And this kind of brings us back to that Gillette ad, right? Where Gillette comes out and makes a statement where they're trying to make a statement that's, I felt like they were trying to make a statement that was somewhat restorative, that was somewhat, saying, hey, we're going to fly the flag here for a different way of being masculine. And as you say, like, massive backlash straight away. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because you have campaigned and talk about a different way of approaching masculinity. I'd love to know what you think.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, there definitely is. So I'm coming to think that the term toxic masculinity isn't that helpful, at least for.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. I so agree.
Yeah, and I think, as an academic jargon, then sure, it might be helpful for academic circles or for activist circles, but I think as a forward-facing tool, it actually does more harm than good. Because what I'm learning is that when Joe on the street hears toxic masculinity, they hear men are bad. And I don't think men are bad. I think our constructs of what we expect men to be like are bad. So that's what toxic masculinity is. When we expect boys to not wear pink, to have muscles, to be good at sports, to win at all time, to have a primacy of work, to have a disdain for homosexuals, to be sexually promiscuous and flagrant with people's feelings, to be stoic and unemotional and unexpressive, those things are problematic for men as much as for women, So the opposite of those things is being nurturing, being emotionally expressive, being a good communicator, not having to, understanding that you don't have to work like 70 hours at the detriment of your family and raising your kids or your friendships. You can do all of those things and still drink a few beers, enjoy the rugby or the NFL, play baseball, lift weights, get laid. Do you know what I mean? Like if I'm being flippant and talking amongst peers, being a decent man means you probably get laid more if you just want to have casual sex with people in an informed, kind, consensual manner. There's this whole horrible, because there's nothing wrong with casual sex, but there's this whole, I got in this fucked up like black hole of the internet last night looking at like pickup artists and like neo-masculinists and like really horrible masculine ideology. Guys standing around with guns hashtagging super toxic masculinity with like beards and muscles. And I was like, what is going on? When no one is saying that being a man is bad, but we're saying that when you think women are pieces of meat and they're stupid and they're just there to be fucked and like bros before hoes, that's what the problem is. When you don't see the problem with wolf whistling and sexual objectification and sexual harassment and talking down a woman in the workplace, that's the toxic masculinity. Those are the negatives that we're saying. And I think, unfortunately, more moderate guys, or guys who are on the fence, are hearing terms like toxic masculinity and seeing the Gillette ad and feeling like everyone's pointing the finger at them as being part of the problem. We're not saying you're doing bad things or you're bad, but we are saying that when you laugh at those jokes, when you don't challenge your friends who might make those flippant sexist statements, that's where the problem is. Like, all it takes for bad things to happen is for good people to do nothing. You know what I mean? Like, what we actually want is for all these good guys, and I would argue that most men are good guys, to be like, oh, yo, man, that's messed up. And we see that role model in the Gillette ad, and I thought that was really good because it showed problematic behavior or action, and then here's a simple solution. You're like, and I think, and I don't know, but there's something done about that made so many men, not just those hyper masculine guys, like guys that I was exploring last night, go crazy. It was, I think, a lot of more moderate guys got at too, and that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, Tash. When it's perhaps not what we're saying, but how we're saying that makes the difference. I think men in general buy that ad, not just guys who I would argue were problematic, but regular dudes. They felt really called out, like en masse, and so yeah, sure, you could argue that there is a knee-jerk response to that from privilege. Privileged people always feel threatened and push back when their privilege is challenged, right? But at the same time, I think the goals of the ad were good. You can be cynical and be like, they're just doing it to get people talking and sell more racist. Sure. But, the philosopher Peter Singer says, if even there's a positive outcome for yourself from doing a good act, it still doesn't take away how good the act is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But, like if I sponsored a team that had no money and couldn't otherwise perform, and I just wanted my name on the shirt, like that's win-win, And I think,
totally.
I think that's the same with, this ad. I think I think Gillette were brave in that they challenged their own advertising. So when those kids run through the old ad at the outset of it, and it's like, is this the best a man can get? Like the alpha male looking dude scoring the heteronormative standard of beauty woman.
Thank you for all your qualifiers there.
You have no idea how terrified I am of the internet, Tash. Like, I'm terrified of the fucking internet. Even the fact that I told you that I had an affair like a million years ago, I'm like, oh no, people are going to think I'm a terrible piece of shit now. Like,
don't worry, mate. I won't use it in the promo clip. It'll be fine.
Yeah, thanks. Please don't. But like, people, I've despite the fact that I'm super hyper aware of how things can get lost on the internet. I mean, it's a soundbite culture, and so yeah, I guess it's important for me to qualify things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I think one of the things that was interesting about that Gillette ad, and the ad, and I think you touched on it, is that if they had hyperbolized the characters in that ad, then I don't think it would have been an issue. But because they didn't hyperbolize, because it was so it felt so accessible. It felt so every guy, exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that there probably was an ad agency behind it who was hoping that they could make, again, a statement, not ask a question, but make a statement, and then maybe win some ad awards and what have you. But as someone said to me, advertising is the common man's art now, and so we live in such a brand saturated world that the brands we associate ourselves with and the advertising that we see actually becomes, that becomes our Monet, and that becomes our Van Gogh, and that becomes our Andy Warhols.
Yeah, that's deep.
Which is fascinating when you think about like how much reaction just a simple TVC can kind of capture.
Create. I had something smart to say, but it's gone. When I think about that ad, there are people on the other end of it who. So so basically the ad is what I do for work in 1 minute and like 40 seconds. You know what I mean? So when I go present at a school, I'm jokey and I'm covered in fucking tattoos, and I always talk about my old past as a kickboxing to get some buy-in, particularly from young men. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like I'm like, yo, this is my shit, dude. Like, what the fuck, But then I try and just give them some critical filters to understand. This is the world we live in. We listen to Post Malone rapping about, fucking a chick until she screams no mas. We rap, like ASAP Ferg is like, I fuck your bitch, nigga. She's about to fuck my crew. It's like like online pornography is increasingly. Well, it depends on what research you read. It's gotten to a point where it's degrading, and perhaps it's staying there. It's not getting worse. But you can Google. The fact that you can Google search and masturbate to a video that's got the word rape in the title, or stepdad fuck stepdaughter, or I fuck my stepsister, and all this familial sex, which has become normalized on, Pornhub. Like, I talk people, men and women, people, of all walks of life, through these sorts of things to try and give them a critical filter and understand you're not bad because you're a man. No one is saying that. I'm a fucking man. I'm definitely not self-hating, whatever you might want to say. Like, I've spent a long time learning to like myself, I promise you. And what we're saying is that what we're teaching you about what the expectations of manhood are, of masculinity are, that's where the problem lies. And we need to give you critical filters so that you can inoculate yourself against them. We need you to understand that it's not true that boys don't cry. It's not true that it's bros before hoes. It's not true that you have to use your fist to solve problems. It's not true that, all women are like super irrational and all guys are super logical, and that boys wear blue and girls wear pink. Like, those things aren't true. Those things are social constructs. It's not saying men and women are the same biologically. Sure, they're different. I don't want men fighting women in boxing, like I don't want, I'm not saying these things. I'm not saying that there aren't some differences between men and women. That's just scientifically untrue. But when it comes to like gendering behaviors, saying these behaviors are acceptable for men and these behaviors are acceptable for women, and if you step outside of them, that's somehow like transgressive and we need to punish you, that's where the problem lies. Because it's the teasing and the bullying and the ostracization that we do to boys who don't fit that alpha male sort of model. That's the problem. And then when we lock those alpha males in those, well, not alpha males, when we lock Joe Bloggs in that box of prescribed social behavior, why do you think we've got so much psychological distress for young men? Why are young men killing themselves? Who makes up the bulk of our prison populations? Young men. Homicide perpetrators and homicide victims are young men. Perpetrators of family and sexual violence, men. Because for so long we're like, this is what you need to be like, and none of us actually fucking fit in that box.
Which I think is probably the one of the most beautiful and yet hard to grasp truths is that none of us actually, whether male or female, or however you might identify, none of us actually fit into the social construct that's been designed for us.
Dude,
because we're too unique, and those constructs are hundreds of years old in a society that is changed beyond.
And I am definitely cognizant of that. I've put myself in those boxes. Do you know when kids stopped teasing me at high school? When I got in a fight and won, because I'd been doing martial arts, after school for so long, and just because I dyed my hair pink and I wore I literally was like super fruity alternative kid, like me and my boys were like the metalers and the punks. This is before I got into hardcore, which has a much better fashion sense. I dyed my hair pink and I'd wear a kilt and bright yellow Doc Marten boots, and I was like everything I could to be the opposite of the rugby culture school that I went to, because that was my rejection, right? That was my teenage rejection of what I saw around me. But do you know when I started changing is when guys at school started treating me different because I was good at fighting. And it's this weird fucking thing where like increasingly all right, well, I'll cut my hair short, and I got, I got stereotypically muscular, and I covered my body in fucking tattoos. And like, I've gone through this, like without realizing it, I've kind of made myself look like a man is meant to look. Do you know what I mean? And I still am struggling with that. I'm like, that's the thing. Do you know why I can go to, like, I've talked to thousands of young people, and I'm not trying to be self-aggrandizing, but I'm really good at it. Young men will take time out of their fucking day to come find me after I've talked at their school. Like, a lot of kids don't even want to go to school. They'll come find me on Instagram and be like, yo, man, came to talk to my school, never thought about it like that. Thanks, dude, Or like, I talked at a few schools in Australia last year, and then I was at a music festival, and a bunch of like teenage kids mobbed up on me and were like, yo, man, you were at our school the other day. And I was like, oh, and they're like, really good talk, man. Like, it's real good. It came from a bloke. And I'm like, oh, yo. And so it's this weird thing where I'm like, well, these ideas are problematic. Shouldn't matter that I'm a dude or that I look this way or whatever, but it works. You know what I mean? I'm like,
sometimes you got to take the win.
I'm trying
right?
to take the win. I'm trying to take the win. It's a fucking hard one. Like, I'm not saying anything like feminist activists haven't been saying essentially for years, but how I fucking say it and the way I look in a stereotypical bro dude thing, which I'm trying to deconstruct, is at the same time why I'm effective at doing it. And it's this weird thing in my head. I'm like, this is so hard. You know what I mean? Like, because if I was like, if I was a more stereotypical effeminate dude and I wore a fucking cardigan and like my sporting background was in, I don't know, checkers or something, I'm not entirely sure I'd be able to do the work as well as I do. Does that make sense, Tash?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the challenges.
I don't know what to do with that. You know, like
maybe you don't have to do anything with it. I mean, maybe that's your space, and that's a space that you get to be in. I mean, I had a conversation on Twitter, because we haven't talked about Twitter for about 10 minutes. So I had a conversation on Twitter not too long ago. A friend of mine who invited me into a conversation on Twitter with a man who had just really encountered this idea of like, wow, there are women out there who have a lot to say about my field. So he works in kind of Christian pastoral work, and he was like, whoa, we really need to like invite women to our table to have this conversation, and then I need to start teaching other people how to do this, and I got invited to join that conversation, and I was like, hey dude, thank you that you are learning, thank you that you are interested, thank you that you are engaging. Also, please don't worry about inviting us to your table just yet. Perhaps you should ask for an invitation to ours, and I think that there's some sort of synchronicity, and there's something that's a bit reciprocal about the fact that there is a space that you can go to and speak to because of who you are, where you just get to shortcut, right? You get to jump over the prolonged intros and the small talk and get to the heart of it. With a group of people that I, as a woman, and as someone who had 10 years of youth work experience, I couldn't get to those places because there's something in that shared lived experience that speaks to people out of who you are, in the same way that there are people I can speak to that I couldn't. Yeah,
Do you know, that's really, yeah, you're right. I guess where I came to realize that, because I constantly struggle with what they call imposter syndrome, to be honest with you, Charlie.
We all do.
Do you really? Because
I'm writing a book at the moment.
Oh, really?
Do you know how hard it is to get up and put pen to paper and then just be like, I'm a fraud. Everybody that has said this has said it better than me before. I should just give up.
That's why I don't even write fucking blog posts for that same reason, let alone books, dude. Like, shit.
Yeah.
Where I kind of have recently come to be like, maybe I am all right at what I do, despite the fact that I can say I'm good at what I do sometimes, is I went and spoke at a maximum security prison the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not the other day, but for White Ribbon Month, for White Ribbon.
Mm-hmm.
And I never had such an engaged audience. Like, I talked to men who are like convicted rapists and murderers and like the full spectrum of high I don't know what to call it. Like maximum offending, men that in my 20s I would never have like given the time of day, and I would have said some horrible shit like, yeah, those people just deserve to be locked up forever, or bring back the death penalty, or some ignorant shit, This guy stood up at the end of it and pushed aside this table and did this super moving haka after I talked about my story and and like I was in tears in front of a room full of like maximum security convicts, and he came up to me and said, I've seen you on TV with the kickboxing and stuff, and I'd love to train with you when I get out. And like he talked about his offending, which had been against women historically, and where he come from and shit like that. And I was just like, wow, man, like I'm glad to be here and just laying it all out, and then adding what I've learned on my journey on top of that, like, and it's connected with you. And yeah, I guess you're right. Like, I guess that's the point I'm saying. I'm reiterating what you're saying. I don't know why I'm telling this stupid story. Like,
That's a great story.
Like if I hadn't listened, if I didn't look like I look, and if I hadn't spent my fucking youth fighting people, and like if I hadn't like grown up how I grew up and made my mistakes, then that bro might not ever have connected with me. He might have just sat there with his arms folded. But I guess, well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and I think that's what we need more guys to do, I guess, is just like all the men I work with. Like, are you familiar with like Vic Tamati and Phil Pikea and
Yeah. Some of those guys for sure.
some of those men have. There's like Vic just got award, like what do you call it at the end, like Queen's Honors or what at the end of the year for his services to stopping violence, and he's amazing, man. Like I've listened to his testimony, and he was both a victim and perpetrator of like horrific violence. And listening to him talk about his journey of change and the vulnerability he elicits from the hardest of men. Like I've stood in a marae with him talking with like patch gang members and shit, and you could hear a pin drop when he's telling his story. Like those are the people that have got what you were talking about, like a unique ability to reach the hardest to reach people. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we need to do is like find the right messenger for the right audience. And I think that's, that ties into I guess the overarching theme of this conversation perhaps is that like not everyone can tell everyone else how to do it. You know what I mean? Like you need to find the right spokesperson to the right group. Like pseudo, like academic masters having of feminist fucking whatever understandings isn't necessarily going to reach this audience. And conversely, I'm not going to reach this audience and blah, 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 blah. So how do we come together as a community of people who do overarchingly want the same changes in society to happen? Like, okay, well, you talk here and I'll talk here and you do that. And let's try not to argue so much about our overall minor differences and put those aside and work towards the greater good. Because what I struggle with, and I hope I'm making sense, but what I struggle with is that we get so caught up as progressive people or activists or leftists or whatever, arguing with ourselves and trying to show how much better we are at doing or how much more that we know, that we actually stop doing the work in a forward-facing way. Do you know what I mean?
I really, really do. I mean, in the transformation work that I do with organizations, as well as, with individuals, but mostly with organizations, what you've just talked about is the thing that makes the key amount of difference in how an organization can transform its culture or its business outcomes. And really what it is trying to figure out like, what's the minimum amount of stuff that we need to agree on? And then what's the next step in action that we need to take as a result of that? I think part of that comes back to, what we were talking about before, which is, what are the questions, or what's the calling in, as you talked about it. I love that phrase. What's the calling in? What's the invitation that I can offer to the people whose ear I have? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if we could all just understand, I mean, I love speaking with you and hearing about the invitation that you're offering to people, as much as I think it would be fascinating for you to understand or to hear the invitations that other people who are connected with the same kind of ideology are sharing. And if we could all understand the invitations that we're offering to people to engage in these conversations and to engage in this, different kind of way or trying to transform the world we're living in, we'd probably we'd have a better understanding of each other to start with.
100%, and we'll be fucking happier. Like, this, I guess, like, it's so in my subconscious that, like, the problematic aspects of Twitter come up all the time in these sorts of conversations, you know what I mean? Because, like, it really bothers me. And increasingly that's the thing, like, you often see social commentators and journalists, like, bemoaning Twitter, but they're still on Twitter. Do you know what I mean? Like,
foraging for stories.
Yeah, oh my God, it's nonsense what makes the papers these days sometimes. But anyway, I think a lot of people are frustrated with not just Twitter, but social media as a platform for these conversations, because we don't agree, as you said, really, really succinctly on the least amount of things that we need to agree on to do the work. we want to get people to agree on fucking everything, but that's just not humanly possible. And I feel like a lot of people don't have basic understandings of like human behavior change and psychology when it comes to helping people change their ideas and their values and their actions. Shame is a really shitty fucking teacher. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, at least at least externally imposed shame, like the shame other people impose on you for your perceived wrongdoings. And these days, it's like perceived wrong thoughts or perceived wrong. You said the wrong word or the wrong tweet or whatever, and then that becomes like this, like that becomes who you are to the public. You know, like people can extrapolate out on like 140 characters and turn it into like a blog post or a story on some sort of like left-wing website.
Sometimes they can turn it into War and Peace. Like,
they can, yeah, exactly. And it's just like, yo, did you even ask that person for clarification, or did you ring them up for like a proper corridor around what their actual values are? You know, like when you have a face-to-face conversation, which is something that we're doing less and less in the modern world, you can clarify things, or you can quantify things, or you can at least see the emotion in that person's face when they're saying it, or hear the tone in their voice. But these days, we're talking about these super complicated subjects that are all relatively new into the public space. And a lot of us are figuring it out as we go along and going, oh, they said this thing, boom, got a victim. You know, like it's about like taking scalps. And I'm like, how's that help? How does that help anyone? How does that? And then is it any wonder we're getting like this real devolution into us and them, and that's manifesting now, like more broadly in physical violence. When you think about what's happening in America, at least, you know, like we've got like this really galvanized, polarized, extreme left and right, and that's coming out in like the Proud Boy movement, who are like alt-right, like neo-masculinist type fucking guys who are all about like smashing people over at protests. And you've got Antifa, you know, who are also using physical violence as an acceptable means to an ends. And while I obviously ideologically agree with the broad strokes of Antifa's movement, I don't think going out and punching motherfuckers in the face in the street, and people will be similarly be like, but you're a kickboxer, like it's the right way to do it. That's not going to create social change. That's how you end up in like civil wars and like prolonged violence. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you extrapolate it out, like if you go out to like, where is this heading in the long run? You know what I mean? Like, I was in this crazy blog space last night because I try best to read I'm trying more to read people's ideas who I don't agree with.
Right.
And it was so yuck, dude. Like, guy, I forget his name, but it was awful, and he had a really huge following. Was talking about like the feminization of society and the gender war hashtag. You know, like talking about how it's not just a war on toxic masculine anymore. And he's using like the Gillette ad and all this sort of shit as like an example of like the broader feminization society, how we're trying to get rid of anything remotely masculine. You know, like do you know what I mean? It was like, in order to
at the highest heights.
in order to like set the scene for the 2020 election, where like Hillary Clinton will be like an acceptable candidate or some shit because she's a woman, because we've like devalued manhood so much and shit. Like, I'm not doing a good job of paraphrasing what he said, but it was like some out there shit. Like I was like, yo, dude, like, what is, like, who hurt you, bro? Like, what has happened? do you know?
Yeah,
and on the other end, I've found, like, you know, left-wing or progressive blogs, which is similarly, I feel, unhinged. And I'm like, when it gets extreme like that, that's unhealthy for our broader society. And that's when things can end up in, like, physical violence. And that's a massive problem. You know?
Yeah, and I think that your observations are some that we should pay attention to, because, you know, as we've sort of talked about, you're pre-programmed, you're primordially wired to sense instability, you know, because of where you grew up and some of that, right? So when you say, hey, this is unhinged, this is out of balance, this is out of whack, oh, well, you know, that's something that we need to pay attention to, because it's an indicator it's an indicator of culture, it's kind of like it's a thermometer in the bath, so to speak. If I could ask one question, we've talked a bit about invitation, we've talked a bit about questions. Like, what's the invitation? What's the calling in that you would love to get as you continue the work that you're doing? Is there an invitation that you'd still love to receive that you haven't, whether it's to a conversation or a platform or a group of people?
Wow, that's big. That's a big question.
I like big ones.
Yeah, no, so do I. Yeah, I do. My boys are always like, bro, you never turn off. Like, now that you're not depressed anymore, all you think about is this big picture shit, dude. Like, what's going on with you? Like, because I tried to, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I want to keep doing this work and speaking to bigger and bigger audiences. And I'm always trying my best to learn. I'm actually like, how do I go back to university, or how do I, I do a lot of research. I read a lot of academic literature. I increasingly get talked to like really smart people. I was speaking at like medical schools about, sexual violence prevention and pornography and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, wow, this is weird. And I don't know, I guess I'm open to any sort of invitation to come and learn, I don't know about being called in wise, but I always want to learn, I always want to learn about how to do this better. So I'm increasingly like getting over my self-consciousness and then emailing people. So I email like guys who study masculinity. So I've been talking to a little bit to Michael Flood in Australia. There's an old professor in Texas called Robert Jensen. Guys whose work Robert Jensen I discovered when I was 20. And I email them now. I'm like, yo, I work in the space and I wouldn't do that if it wasn't for your work. And like, I always want to have a conversation, you know what I mean? So I think I'm meeting up with a university professor at the University of Auckland on Tuesday because I read, or maybe it's Wednesday, one day, I read an article she wrote. And I just increasingly, if no one invites me, I'll invite myself. I emailed her and I was like, hey, you might not have heard of me, but this is what I do. And I always want to learn. And do you have like a regular email? Because I want to keep up to date with the research or your findings. And I might not agree with it all, but I want to build these bridges because I see so much work done in silos and it's competitive and people want to put, I don't know, like almost themselves ahead of the greater good or their organization's funding in it. And I get that. And like, so I'm just trying my best to be like, oh, you should talk with this person. And I'm trying really hard to like get to know everyone in this space. And I'm aware there are people who don't like me or they don't like how I do the work or whatever. And that's cool. You don't have to like me, but please don't like at least be malicious about me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So
I don't know. Like I don't know who I want to. I'd love to get invited by anyone who does think about gender inequality or violence prevention or masculinity research or mental health. Anyone who ever like is working in that space and has done so for a long time, because I can't go to every, like a lot of people get in touch and they've got some new brainwave about this. I'm sorry, I can't do everything, but people who have been doing it for a while and can teach or want to collaborate or whatever, I'm always open to like learning because I don't have it all figured out. I was talking to Dr. Kim McGregor, who set up Rape Crisis Auckland. She set up like the initial rape crisis responses in like I think the 80s and 90s, and now she's like the government advisor when it comes to like victims advocacy. She's an amazing woman, and I said like I feel real fake doing this because I don't have a doctorate like you do in sexual violence prevention, for example. And she said, don't worry, none of us do. Like we're all learning as we go in this space, and the secret is to just be open to learning instead of always wanting to win. And I think that's where I'm always open to have a conversation. I'm like, yo, I'll go anywhere and listen to fucking anyone who's constructive, even if I don't agree with them. You know what I mean?
Hi, it's Tash, and it's time for the credits. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Transformationist. Please subscribe, rate, and review this episode wherever you listen to it, and share it with a friend.
Visit thetransformationist.org for links to the resources mentioned in this episode and to subscribe to our email updates. You can also share your transformation story with us there, and I would love to hear from you. As always, this episode is produced by Michael Yoder at Truthwork Media. Music is by Hans Van Vliet. For more about me and the transformation work I do, check out the website. This show is proudly made possible by Solar Feeder Consulting.